Well, hello, everybody. Guess what today's show is about? It's about you. It's our 1-year anniversary show. Yep, 26 shows are in the can, so to speak. Can you believe it? We have posted 26 episodes so far, and what a year it's been. Who would have thought I would have had the concentration to do a year's worth of shows so far without a little ADHD kicking in? Some in this building didn't think we'd be able to make it past episode 3, but we did, and I'm very proud of that accomplishment. As always, Eli, the most eligible bachelor in all of Florida, is on the board and producing. Emily, our graphic artist extraordinaire, who tricked me into helping to create our podcast logo, she's in her office creating today. And Evangelina, of course, she's not here. She's out doing God knows what marketing for us, and we appreciate that. Let's also not forget Michael, who's filled in producer for a couple of episodes when Eli was away on assignment. I think he was auditioning for Farmer Wants a Wife.
Guess we'll never know.
Yes, we'll know. Well, did you get it? Did you get it on the show?
I'll find out when the next season comes out.
All right, let's find out. Now, we don't have a big budget for production or fireworks or even a well-produced ski show by the Cypress Garden ski team to celebrate, so I'll probably just take the staff out to lunch at Longhorns or something. I want to talk a little bit about why I decided to do Todd's podcast. It came about as an idea, as a way to be creative, a creative outlet. I was doing some blog writing for Two Blue Aces, and I thought this might be an interesting way to be creative as well. Came up with an idea. The hardest part, I think, Eli, was coming up with a name.
Yes.
Because I had never really even listened to a podcast before. Jennifer gave me a couple of podcasts to listen to. My daughter gave me a couple of podcasts to listen to. And I said, okay, I think we can do this. Eli was selected. Maybe you lost the pick. Maybe you won it. I don't know, to be our producer. But Eli's been here with us since day one. And so coming up with a name, I threw out everything I could think of, the Toddcast, a whole bunch of other stuff. And Eli said it doesn't have to pertain to the podcast. It can be creative. So that got about 2 or 3 more pages that I just threw on the paper, of which all but 1 or 2 were quickly snuffed out. They didn't make the cut. And we ended up settling on Todd's podcast, which I really kind of like. And so that was kind of not as creative as you might think, but it really kind of encapsulates me as the podcast that I'm doing, so it's well named in my opinion. Some have said, well, is it on audio or video or both? And I always wanted to do audio only. I didn't want to do video. One, it's easier to produce. So Eli's job's a lot easier. None of us are doing podcast full time for our living. Eli squeezes me in whenever he can, and I do these while I'm trying to sell real estate, but also kind of had the idea of people listening to it on the radio, their Bluetooth, their whatever podcast, wherever they listen to the internet. And my original thought was for my daughter. She was living in Winter Haven at the time, traveling back and forth to downtown Orlando, and she would be stuck on I-4 for an hour, hour and a half. And I said, well, what a neat way for me to just communicate with her. Not sure she listened to that many of them, but she was at the forefront of my mind. My son Jacob he lives in Lakeland and had a job at the Bartow Air Base, and his commute time was 20 to 25 minutes, depending on how fast he was driving at that particular time. And that way he could listen to a whole show. Each show's 50 minutes to an hour, give or take a couple of minutes, and that way he could listen to a whole show in one day. He actually listens to it when he's mowing the grass or doing yard work or whatever. So that's how he enjoys it. But it's also easier for the people who are recording. They don't have to get dressed up. We don't have to worry about hair and makeup. Not that any of our folks would, but it just took one of the variables out. So the audio is kind of the route we decided to go. Have we gotten better? I think so. I think the first couple of episodes that we did, I'm not a professional broadcaster. Did not go to broadcast school, did not go to journalism school. I think the last thing I wrote journalism-wise might have been for my high school, I think it was called the Trident, which was our high school, the weapon that our mascot would carry. I wrote for our high school paper. But, so me trying to figure out how to put thoughts down on a paper, again, I'm good at putting a lot of stuff down, and Eli was very good and very patient to try and organize it and make it sound a lot more articulate in the flow of how we did it. So I think I've gotten better at asking and listening. I can be accused of many times in the past of not being a great listener, but I think I've gotten much better at it. Our guests, they've been amazing. They've been conversational. They've been very supportive. And we'll get into more of that later on. But the quality of guests that we have had so far have just been phenomenal. And I couldn't be more thankful to them of how well they've treated me, how well they responded to the questions. Sometimes when I might have been struggling, they've all been interviewed before. They knew how to pick up the ball and run with it. So I think that was, we've had great guests, and I've been very happy with that. I've asked for critiques on my performance as your host, and you have responded. So here we go with some of those critiques. Sometimes when I run into folks who say they heard my podcast, I'll always ask how they liked it. Some have been so kind and said they liked it, and they think I have a great voice and I do a good job, and others, feedback from others have been kind of mixed. Some of that feedback is you talk too much, you ask questions and you don't let the guest answer. You preface the answers too much by leading them into the answer you want them to give, and you're kind of heavy towards the military, aren't you? I've asked for suggestions for guests and topics that you wanted to hear from, and some of those suggestions have ranged from recreational marijuana to electric vehicles, and where are all the charging stations that were promised by the Biden administration. Some have been about sustainable food and living. Some have asked for more environmental issues. Some of you have asked for more military leadership interviews, and I love all the generals you have on and the insights they offer. So we're getting a little bit of everything. And what's really interesting is a good friend, John Strang, he seems to be a frequent name on the podcast. I never even noticed that. But Dr. J, I hope you're listening. That was noticed by one of the listeners who said, why is John Strang on your podcast so much? And I've never had him on as a guest, but he has been referenced 2 or 3 or 4 times throughout. So thank you, Doctor, for being part of it as well. One of the quotes was, I loved hearing from Rowdy Gaines. Another, I love Grady's episode. Your voice sounded a little weak on this episode. So there's no shortage of people who want to give me their opinion, and that's why I ask, because I do want it. I try to listen, and I try to make improvements. Again, I think I'm a better listener than I used to be, and I try and make it a very conversational podcast. Some topics I know more about than others, but I've learned more from each guest and more about each topic that we've discussed. So that's been very beneficial to me, and hopefully it's made for a better podcast episode. Some suggestions from listeners for guests have been self-promotional, like, hey, I want to be on, you should let me talk about this or that, or you let me talk about myself. Some are from elected officials. Hey, give me a platform. I want to talk about why I'm running for office. And I'm really trying not to do that. I'm not saying that I won't have them on, but I've really tried to have this not be a political podcast, because they're everywhere. No one's changing anyone's opinion. So I really tried to keep it topical about interesting people and interesting topics and interesting subjects. So that's been kind of the approach that we've taken. Eli's been the producer here, and one of the tasks I asked him before we produced the show today is I asked him, what are your top moments over the past year? You've been here for all but 2 of them. Mm-hmm. And, you've listened to the podcast, you've listened to every one of them, whether you were there to record them, but you always produce them, and you listened to them and you edited them before you sent them to me and before you posted them. And so I said, which ones are the most memorable to you? So Eli, do you have any thoughts on this? I'm not necessarily looking for anything in any particular order, but which were the most memorable to you?
Yep, I've got a few moments prepared that I've remembered as I was going through our list of episodes that we've done, and in no particular order, as you said. The first one I want to talk about is Nathan Shaka Khan. He is the commanding officer of the NOAA Hurricane Hunters at the Aircraft Operations Center in Lakeland. And that was probably one of my favorite episodes in general. Again, not in any particular order, but in this episode, he talks a lot about him flying into hurricanes and the dangers that come with that. And I thought it was really cool.
Okay, so before you click your radios, we're not replaying the whole show. It's just a little 2 or 3 minute snippet of the interview with Chaka Khan.
Yep, here we go.
But Hurricane, it was Matthew, and I think it was in 16. We did a flight where literally it's the single worst pass I ever had in an airplane, and the eye of that storm wasn't even filled in. Like, it was what we call an open eye wall on the backside. So we came into the band of the eye wall on the entrance leg, and we got hit so hard that as we broke into the eye of the storm, the intercom system on the airplane went dead quiet for about 10 seconds. And quiet on one of those airplanes is never good. Like, that's never a good thing. We run our mouths the entire flight. Part of it, I think, is a human connection thing, and part of it is that we're actually trading information that's necessary. But it's but you could tell. Like, it was one of those moments where nobody really said anything, but we all just kind of looked at each other and thought. I was thinking, like, well, I don't want to do that again. And then as we came out of the clouds, the sky was clear. Like, it was clear, it was beautiful. But right behind us was the single worst pass I'd ever had.
Wow. And that was one of the things I'd ask you. Have you ever gotten back on the ground, looked at the co-pilot and your team and said, oh, crap, I just don't think I want to do this again? Or we're lucky to be on the ground?
So we work real hard to make sure that we're all trained incredibly well, and everybody knows their part in the dance, right? They're part of that program. And so I've never come off of a flight and thought, nope, like, no, I think I'm good. Like, we're not going to do this anymore. I had passes like that one where I was like, ooh, okay, that was bad. Are we okay? And you kind of look around quietly, and you could see everybody else is kind of quietly looking around, like, you guys okay? Is that okay? And so we've had those things. We've also got some limitations on the airplane itself, that tell us when we hit a limit, specifically for things like load factor. So when you hit turbulence, the G load on the airplane changes. Like, some people don't think about that, but it's because it's not like a roller coaster where you go through it and it's a gradual load up of G force and then it drops off and you feel your stomach come up and down and those kind of things. In a storm, it feels like you're hitting something because the wind shifts so dynamically that it feels like we actually call it taking a hit. And if we exceed 3.5 Gs on the load meter for the aircraft, we're done. We come home and get the aircraft inspected and that kind of stuff, and that keeps us from really breaking it. So I've never had a flight where I came home and I was like, ooh, I think I'm done, guy. That Top Gun moment, because that's my movie, where, Cougar lost it, turned in his wings. Like, I've never seen that. I know a pilot who has. Like, I flew with a guy that came in, and the thing about flying in hurricanes is that you can't prepare somebody for what flying in a hurricane is. You just have to go do it.
I like that one, Eli. That was a great choice. I actually just had lunch with Captain Khan today, and with General Beef Haddad, and with General Mumbles Palumbo. And it was kind of interesting. All three of them were complaining about their backs and their arms and their shoulders and their knees and how sore they were, and how flying, whether it was just the repetition of the rumbling of the seats, or the G-forces or whatever, the effect that it had on their body, and it's also going to have the effect on other pilots as well. So, great clip. What's next?
All right, next up we have Jake Palumbo. He is a retired Major General of the United States Air Force, and he's also one of the senior consultants at Two Blue Aces, and we've had a few of those guys on, and they've all been awesome episodes. This particular clip, he was talking about how he had the opportunity to land on an aircraft carrier, and there was some mishap that went on there with a Navy pilot and his refueling squadron, and I thought it was interesting.
Good. Let's hear it.
All right, let me pull it up.
You've also made some aircraft landings, aircraft carrier landings.
Carrier landings.
What plane were you flying to land, and tell me a little about that?
Yeah, it's a really long story, so we won't go into the whole thing, but it's actually rather humorous. And the humorous part is I was the commander here in the Middle East. I had a large tanker squadron, those big airplanes that can pass fuel to smaller airplanes. And one of the young Navy pilots came into Afghanistan, jumped on my tanker to get another full tank of gas, and ended up struggling and broke a big 2-foot section of his probe off, a big steel section, and scrubbed the whole mission. Probably 50, 60,000 gallons of gas couldn't be passed because this Navy guy broke my daggum airplane. So when we have my staff meeting that afternoon, I said, "What happened to mission 4?" And they said, "Well, some Navy guy broke off the probe in the drogue and it scrubbed the mission, sir." And I go, "Well, give me that probe and get me the admiral on the phone. I'm going out there tomorrow." And they go, "You're going out where?" And I go, "I'm going out to the Eisenhower," which was the carrier in the Gulf of Oman that was doing these combat operations. And I landed. I didn't land. They took me in a transport airplane, landed, and the admiral knew I was upset. So he goes, "Hey, as soon as Jake lands, put him in an F-18, get him all strapped in, and take him out and fly him around and do some carrier landings. That'll shake him up enough that he won't yell at me." And immediately I'm in the airplane. And I mean, they put me in the catapult. I was shot into the air, and we were immediately doing the coolest things in the world. In the F-18. And then we came around, and I landed and did what's called a trap cat trap. It's very, very few people ever in the history of naval aviation ever get to do this. But you come in on an F-18, you take the wire, you trap into one of the wires on the top of the boat. They pull you out of that wire, they put you back into another catapult, and within 30 seconds, you're back in the air again. And I mean, you talk about your head scrambling. You go from 150 to 0, and then from 0 to 150 in about 30 seconds.
Did it give you a little more respect for the Navy guys after doing that?
Oh, heck yeah. And then I had dinner with the Admiral in his suite that he had aboard the Eisenhower. And I called that young lieutenant up who broke my airplane, and his face was ashen, as he walked into the Admiral's suite and then sees this Air Force general with this big, long steel pipe going, "Hey, son, where did this come from?" And I said, "Do you recognize this?" And he said, "I do." And I go, "You ought to take that down to the maintenance shack and help those guys fix your daggum airplane that you broke." And he goes, "Yes, sir. Can I be dismissed?"
Another great choice, Eli. That's pretty good. I remember him telling us that story, and I do like the fact that the captain of the aircraft carrier decided he was going to try, or the admiral was going to shake Jake up a little bit and shoot him off the deck in an F-18, but it doesn't sound like it had the desired effect. So, bravo to you. What's the next one you got for us?
So next is Rowdy Gaines. This is one of our first episodes that we published back in September. He is a 3-time Olympic gold medalist and swimming's greatest ambassador. Although he did go on to win gold in '84, he does talk about in this episode about when the U.S. boycotted the 1980 Olympics, which me being a little younger, I didn't even know was a thing until this interview. And it was just shocking to hear and the way he talks about it. And this is just a small snippet of it, but he does go into detail further in the episode. But here we go with Rowdy Gaines.
So in '80, you were at the height of your career. You were you held world records. Everybody's excited, especially in our hometown. Rowdy's going to the Olympics, and the decision comes down, they're boycotting the Olympics.
Right.
Mentally, how do you go from getting ready to showcase your talent to the whole world to being shut down, the mental and emotional toll it took on you, how you dealt with it, how you came back?
Well, it was devastating in the terms of swimming. I mean, from a life standpoint, there are a lot more important things than being able to go to an Olympic Games. But certainly as a swimmer, that's, Todd, our pinnacle of success. We don't have a World Series or Super Bowl. It's the Olympics.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's every 4 years. It's not every year, right?
Yep.
So, it was really tough not to be able to do that and know that you're going to have to wait another 4 years, especially when I swam, buddy, because there was no money in swimming back when I swam. In
Right.
fact, you weren't allowed to accept money between 1982 and 1984. In fact, I worked as a night clerk in a hotel. I had the 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift every night, just to try to make money and survive. So it was a little bit of a different time, but for me, I was very blessed because I had 1984. There were 363 athletes on that 1980 team that did not make it in 1984 and also didn't make it in 76. So those are the real quote unquote heroes of the Olympic movement, because they never had a chance to compete. I did, and I was blessed to be able to have that opportunity.
Sorry about hitting the microphone there. Another great episode. It's interesting that you had picked Rowdy and General Palumbo, two guys I graduated high school with, because a lot of our mutual friends, they just loved the episode with Rowdy. They loved the episode with Jake. Rowdy's got such a compelling personality. He just finished the Summer Olympics, calling the swimming in Paris a couple weeks ago. And I texted him when he was done. I just said, Rowdy, you continue to make swimming exciting for those of us that aren't swimmers. So very fortunate that we had Rowdy on. You could tell the difference in sound. Rowdy called in as opposed to being live. And my voice was a little different. So I'm continually trying to do better with my voice. And I do better in the mornings and afternoons. So we try and record in the mornings. But it was another very interesting episode with Rowdy, where he did talk much more in depth about the 80s, the 80 Olympics, and he was the fastest man on water. That year he was the best in the world, not the best in Florida or the best at Auburn, but he was the best in the world, and that's something that he'll always have with him for he and his family. What you got next, Eli?
All right, next up was the other phone-in interview that we did, but it also was another great episode with Trey Mancini.
Oh, yeah, I like that episode. That was good.
Yeah, he's another Winter Haven native, Major League Baseball player and 2021 American League Comeback Player of the Year. I thought Trey had a great story to tell that I, again, was unaware of when we first interviewed him.
You're unaware of a lot. Have you noticed that?
I'm starting to become more aware, but this was last year, so... but yes, he was a Major League Baseball player, and while he was in training, I think he was still with the Orioles at this point. He went in for a routine checkup, and they discovered something that a tumor that led to his cancer diagnosis, and it was just a great story that I think should be told.
All right, let's hear it. I want to move on to ask you about March 2020. You left spring training to undergo a medical procedure. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I got to spring training that year and did our typical blood work. We have basically entry, blood work, all the baseline tests just for a normal physical that they do every year. And my iron levels came back super low. And they retested them again, and they were still the same. So they thought it could have been a weird test or something, but no, my iron levels were low. So at my age, originally we were like, it's most likely a stomach ulcer or celiac disease, but luckily the trainers did have some concern, and they, said just in case we're going to give you an endoscopy and colonoscopy. And unfortunately during the colonoscopy, they found a tumor in my colon. So a few days later, I had to fly up to Baltimore and get surgery. So I actually found out on March 6th, and then March 12th was my surgery. And then another 6 days later, I found out that it was stage 3 colon cancer, and I had to do 6 months of chemotherapy. So it lined up right when COVID hit as well. So it was just a really bizarre time for everybody, but especially me going through this. And I did 6 months of chemo and ended in September of 2020, and knock on wood, have been good since then. But, it was an extremely scary diagnosis and life-changing diagnosis. And I missed that 60-game season that year. It was crazy. It was a
But
rough 6 months, but got through it, and lucky enough to be alive, and back playing too. So I never thought something like that could happen to me, but it was definitely a perspective changer, and something that I try to use for the better now.
well, you definitely had a bunch of family and friends and teammates and everyone back in Winter Haven and around that were certainly concerned for you and praying for you, and glad that you've had a good outcome. But I mean, do you ever contemplate, hey, if I wasn't playing baseball and gone in for a blood test, I mean, how many 27, 28, 29-year-olds just go in for a routine blood test to find something like that? That could have been, I mean, that's a blessing in disguise right now, is that you had that type of doctor care from the trainers to the docs and everyone that were able to discover that.
Absolutely. And it's something I'm thankful for every day, because there were no other signs that I was sick. I was maybe feeling a little more fatigued than normal, but nothing alarming. So it's something that I would not have found out about until it was too late. And it's something that I'm just, I am indebted to the doctors, my trainers, everybody. And yeah, if I wasn't playing baseball, it would have been too late. So I'm very lucky.
That was probably one of the more poignant episodes we had, just about the seriousness of what Trey had gone through in the early detection, and how fortunate he was to have caught it early because of the care that he had. So I do appreciate Trey, his courage, the foundation that he's founded and his family's running. So that was a wonderful episode that we had on with Trey. One clip you didn't put in there was a story about him and my nephew kind of throwing a fit back in the day. They played tennis, so shout out to you, LB, on that one. What's next?
All right, we've got 2 more clips to show, and this next one
to listen to.
To listen to, correct.
Okay.
And this next one, I could not include our own Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd on this list.
Him.
Yeah, you might have heard about him. But this list would not be complete without a clip from him. He gave us 2 great episodes right at the beginning of the show. And in this episode, he talks about a lot of different things, one of them being his infamous press conferences. And he talks about how he prepares for them, how his staff helps, and I thought it was very interesting.
I know each incident is different, but when you're out in the field, tell us how you go about being educated by your investigators, your deputies, your detectives, to prepare you for, and the press conferences are 20, 25 minutes easily, and they pull out that soundbite that they seem to do.
Absolutely. The thing that's interesting to me is the most important thing we do is communicate. And if you don't communicate with your bosses, and that is the people who hire you or the people who elect you, then they don't know what you're doing. I have the most professional staff that anyone in this world could ever ask for.
And I would agree with that. I've been around them enough. I am from your deputies up to your chiefs to your civilians.
My deputies, my detectives, my detention folks, and my inner staff in the office of the sheriff are simply the very best. But a horrible, tragic event occurs, and I have briefings before I go to talk to the media. And they have all the information. One of the things that gets traditional law enforcement agencies in trouble with the community is they won't tell them anything.
Correct.
And that didn't work then. It really doesn't work now in the social media era, because if you don't if you don't relate information, then what I call the social media terrorists come in and just create all kinds of communication and community problems for you. So I give people the best information I have just as soon as I can after a tragic event occurs. And I tell everyone to include the media. The information I give you today is early, very early in the investigation. It's not only subject to change, but some of these details will change. So my staff gathers the information. I sit with them, and they have all of this for me in writing. for me, the magic of it is I make them read it to me. And then I write it by hand. Because for me, if I write it and they tell me, I memorize it.
Right.
That's how I can read it, but I don't memorize it as well as if I write it. And I think that comes back from my old college days.
Right.
So I write it. And when I stand up to speak to the community, whether it's social media or on television, I try to talk to folks as if I'm sitting in the living room with them and we're having a conversation.
Right.
And that is my communication style.
And I think it's also your personality comes out as well.
Well, you're absolutely right. It does come out. And what's interesting is that you don't want to see some stiff government figure. You want to see somebody that has the emotion and the concern of the tragedy or the event as it's occurred. And then I talk to people like we're best friends sitting on the couch. And it works.
That was a perfect example of why our sheriff is such a great communicator and how important it is and what his goal in these press conferences are. People think, oh, he just likes being on TV. Well, it's a useful tool to him, but his job is to communicate with the community that everything's going to be okay, that the men and women of law enforcement are going to be keeping us safe and they're on top of things. And we're so fortunate to have Sheriff Judd. He did give us 2 episodes. It was probably the second or third one that we recorded. And I want to thank him, but I'm also trying to get him on for this year as well. We're trying to come up with a couple of topics that he may want to talk about and see what's in the news. But he's always so gracious with his time, and we want to thank Sheriff Judd for that. We've got one more, I think, that was your
Correct.
top 6 in no particular order.
Top
Eli?
6 in no particular order.
Okay.
I have Polk County Commissioner Bill Braswell.
Oh, my God.
I really enjoyed his episode.
Okay.
He is also a United States Air Force veteran, and he told a really good story, which I don't know if you knew this story beforehand. I didn't know it, but about when he was an airline pilot and he was actually flying into New York the day of the September 11th tragedy. And it was just a great story. This snippet that you listeners are about to hear is just a small clip from that story, but it was very good, and I encourage you all to listen to it.
Okay.
I've told this story a few times, but one of the most interesting times was I was a 737 captain for Delta on 9/11, and I was actually descending to land into New York when the first tower got hit. And I, of course, like everybody else, I remember it vividly. The sky, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was real windy that day. I remember that. And then, an airliner hit the World Trade Center. You're thinking, what kind of goober? I mean, how can you do that?
That's really pilot error.
Yeah. I mean, I'd been in aircraft where neither pilot was flying and nobody was paying attention, but that didn't happen near the ground. That was up in the air. And so, and of course the air traffic controllers immediately go hold here, go hold there. They're trying to sort it out. Then when the second one hit, the whole world, well, everybody in New York knew this is the real deal. And what most people don't realize is the aviation industry at that moment melted down. The controllers were losing control of the airplanes because there was no place for everybody to go. They didn't want to put anybody on the ground, but at the same time, they wanted everybody on the ground. So, the controllers, you could call a controller and they wouldn't respond. So as a captain, I, used my captain's authority and made a decision. We're not going to New York. I told the co-pilot, I said, look, dude, I think we're at war. I mean, something really bad is going on. In every airliner there, and I've been retired for 15 years, so it's probably better now, but we had a thing called ACARS, and it was how you communicated with your dispatcher. It was text messaging. ACARS melted down. You couldn't communicate with the dispatcher. couldn't communicate with the controller. So we just turned the airplane. And because we were flying from Fort Lauderdale to New York, I knew we tankered fuel because fuel was really expensive in New York. So we had enough to get back to Fort Lauderdale. But my car was in Orlando. So I made the decision, we're going to where my car is, and that's the Orlando airport. So we turn. I just climbed up to 23,000 feet, which is for the average or normal jet. You'll get the fastest true airspeed at that flight level. And we just pointed directly at Orlando and headed back. Not really talking to any controllers. I called the passenger. It was morning, early in the morning. The passengers knew the sun had started on the right and now it was on the left. So I had to explain to them. But before I did that, what really was so bad to think about it, I called the lead flight attendant up. Of course, I opened the cockpit door, and you know how that could have ended. I called her up, and I said, "Hey, we're going to Orlando. There's been a problem in New York."
Did you make it all the way to New York till you saw it, or you just?
Yeah, no, we saw it.
Okay.
No, we were 30 miles out.
So you were on approach almost.
Yeah, we were on approach. We were on what's called an arrival, which it's a kind of a step down to the runway. And so anyway, so we're headed back, and I called the lead flight attendant before I made the announcement to the passengers, and I said, "Hey, the World Trade Tower's been hit by both World Trade Towers have been hit by airliners, and she faints." And I'm like, "Crap, what's this all about? Talk about wilting under pressure." We get another flight attendant up in the cockpit. We had, the ammonia tablets. We get her back. Her son was on his first day of work at the World Trade Center.
Oh my God. That was an incredible story that you're right. I had never heard it before, and I've served as a county commissioner with Bill and known him for a number of years. It was a phenomenal story, and I hope you go back to his episode and listen to that. And for some reason, he sounds a lot like Santa Claus. I'm not sure why, but it kind of the same tone of his voice. But that was maybe one of the episodes that if you're going to listen to one, do that one, because it was an incredible story. And it gave you some insight that you're not going to hear just from the news that we got that day. So great choice, Eli. I appreciate your work on that. As I'm going around asking people for input, I happen to be at this off-road park in South Polk County, west of Fort Meade, called Bone Valley. I was down there for some dedication ceremony, and some dude wearing a turtleneck sweater named Wade A, and he's going by the name the Greek god. He comes up to me, and I'm thinking, the Greek god of what? I don't know. But he had 12 cats with him. He said he had another 17 in his van down by the river. Wade A is a big fan of the show and never misses an episode of Todd's podcast. I asked him, I said, "Hey, Wade A, hey, Greek god, what's your favorite episode?" And he named every one of the episodes that we have, and he named them in sequence. And he said, "I love them all, but his favorite ones were Rowdy and Jake Palumbo." So thank you again, Greek God. I appreciate the input. It was an interesting 5 to 7 minute exchange with you. I appreciate that loyal support. And Eli, since he's got so many cats, can we maybe send him a Friskies coupon and a Speedo and a copy of the first season of Black Sheep Squadron? Let's send that down to him. And just send down him and his cats in the van down by the river and see if it's okay.
I'll add it to the Amazon order.
Okay. Do they sell that stuff on Amazon?
Sure.
I guess they sell everything on Amazon. Yeah. Another question was, how long does it take to do an episode? How long do you have to think about it? And I tell people they average 4 to 7 hours on my part. Eli's probably got another 4 to 5 hours on his part. I could be a little light on that number. But part of it is got to come up with people and topics, of which Eli certainly sits in with and helps create some of these ideas and topics. And then typically I'll be the one who gets to ask the folks if they'll come on. And then when they say yes, then I've got to figure out how do I talk to someone for about an hour, hour and a half to edit it down to about an hour. We've got to come up with questions. Some episodes are much easier to do than others. Some I know a lot more about the person or about the topic than I do about others. So the research isn't quite as much. One of the episodes that was probably one of the more difficult ones was with Bud Strang. And Bud's a guy that I grew up with. He's my older brother Rick's age. We used to vacation, our families vacation together. We hunted together, played in the backyard, skied together. Bud and I even bought real estate together. I happened to be his tenant at my office in Winter Haven. So I've known Bud quite well for many, many years. And when you know someone that well, you really have to guard against just goofing on each other with inside jokes that only he and I will get. So took a little more research with him, and but I think his episode came out well. I told my mom that, hey, I interviewed Bud for the podcast today. She said, I bet he didn't talk very much. And I said, no, he didn't, but we got 45, 50 minutes out of it. So again, Bud, thank you for that. What do we look for in the future with guests? Eli, you got any thoughts? Because, you know, I've spoken, we kind of came up with the idea of generally speaking, you thought that was a good idea. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're going to get a couple of these generals at a time from Two Blue Aces. Talk a little bit about real world situations and issues, what's facing the military, what's facing the public. Let them let their hair down as a little bit if they can and talk. I think we've got 6 of them that are involved with Two Blue Aces. Mm-hmm. And we're going to try and have 2 on at a time and, you know, do 45 minutes, hour and 15 minutes, just talking about some inside baseball that they have on different topics that are of interest to them and that are of interest to Eli and I. Also, Ed Childs, he is a fraternity brother of mine and a friend of the family. He owned 3 restaurants over in, I think, Longboat, Anna Maria, and I can't remember where the other one was. The Sandbar is probably his most famous, but he's involved with sustainability of food. We're working to get him on in the next couple of months. We're going to try and get Miss Florida, the reigning Miss Florida, like we did this past year, to come in and talk to us about the Miss America pageant, what she sees, what's coming on in the pageant world, and, you know, talk a little bit more about the pageant. That's not just a beauty contest. It is a scholarship program and what the young ladies get out of that. We're going to try and get a couple of folks from the court system on both sides of the aisle. We'll see how that goes. I'd love to get more professional athletes. They are fun to talk to. They have interesting stories. And I'd like to talk to them about their approach to the sport that they particularly play and what it's like to be a professional athlete and the dedication it takes to be a professional athlete. Working on getting another statewide economist, Brad O'Connor from the Florida Realtors. His episode did very well. I had a couple of people said, hey, I listened to it twice. I really liked it. So we're working on getting someone from the statewide economic point of view and maybe talking to us about what to expect after the election, or if we don't get him on until after the election, we'll talk about what's going to happen for either President Harris or President Trump when they take office in January. I'd like to also get another scientist or 2 on. That episode about water was very interesting. There are some scientific and environmental issues that we can talk about to kind of discuss environmental fears, some things that are scaring people, some ways to talk about them, and maybe ways that are not so fearful. I'd really like to get Santa back, make another appearance if we still have his number. I don't think we threw it away. Hopefully he'll be a little more sober this time. But he did okay last time, and we will work with him on his appearance again if you think we can make that happen, Eli.
I think so.
So I want you to keep sending your suggestions to me with interesting topics, interesting people, and also what makes them interesting. Don't just say, hey, you should have John Doe or Jane Smith. And it's like, okay, well, how do I get an hour out of that? You know, there's got to be some help in deciding why we would go with that person or that topic, and you can provide some insight. So most of you know how to get in touch with me. If not, how do they get in touch with us through the show, Eli?
You can go to todddancer.com. There's a contact form at the bottom of the page that you can fill out.
Okay, is that the best way?
That is probably the best way
to put it in writing. And also let us know how to get back in touch with you. Don't just
Correct.
send it in with no return way of doing that. We're kind of drawing to a little bit of a close. We got a couple more minutes, and I wanted to offer some Todd's words of wisdom. I'm not sure if that's the best way to put it. I'm not sure how wise I am, but, there's a lot of trepidation out there right now. And so what I want to tell you is, if you're tired of watching the news and you don't like what you see on the news, turn the channel. It's very liberating. It's like going from briefs to boxers. TV should be entertaining and not frustrating and depressing, so turn the channel. If you're tired of the Kardashians and all the nonsense that goes on with them and all the celebrities, again, don't pay attention to them. They should have absolutely no influence on your life. Turn the channel, delete it. They should have nothing going on in your life. If you have a child, or you know someone who has a child who's heading off to college right now, or upcoming, have them flip on to Hal Wallace's episode, because he had a great message for parents who are sending a child off. He talked about the Greek system, but it wasn't just the Greek system. He talked about having a plan when your child goes off and making sure your child has a plan once they're there. And it did have a Greek system slant to it, because we were both a product of the Greek system. But it was a great message for those that maybe were never in the Greek system, who have a child going off, or their child may not want to do it. But it was a great episode with Hal, I thought, and it just came out a couple episodes ago. Understand there is little difference in news and opinion anymore. So don't be misled by newscasters who are giving your opinion. A news story should have the who, what, when, where, why, and how. It should never have I think or in my opinion. That then becomes an opinion piece, and it doesn't necessarily reflect an actual news story. It may have a piece of it, so don't get caught up in there. Sadly, Eli, there's not a whole lot of local news left that's being published. Newspapers are struggling. I mean, it's too bad, because it still greatly affects us, and it's good for the community to have a healthy news organization, be it newspaper, radio, whatever. But newsprint was the most prominent way. But we should be holding our elected officials accountable, and not just taking them at their word, questioning them, asking them why, and please defend your decision. Don't be rude when you're talking to them, but it's your job. You've taken on that responsibility as being a news source to go out and vet these candidates and find out what makes them tick, because they're going to be making rules, whether it's state, local, federal, that are going to affect our lives until the next election comes along. And so I hope the newspaper and the journalism community, which is so important to holding both sides accountable, can continue to stay as healthy as they are and continue to get more healthy. I want you to listen to more music that you like. I try and listen to more and more music. My tastes tend to be in the classic 70s and 80s classic rock. A little bit of the 60s, because I was a little kid back then. Some of the 90s are okay, but I kind of lose track of the stuff that Eli listens to and Gene Conrad listens to. I don't know what the heck that was that Gene was talking about. But try and integrate a little bit of music into your life. Also, what I've been trying to do more is take about 5 minutes in the morning and in the afternoon, if you can put it on your calendar to make sure you pay attention and do it, and just center yourself. Try and, if you have a door, close it. If not, go outside and just try and take a moment to put your mind in neutral. Don't think so hard about the troubles that are going on. Let your mind drift away and just center yourself, and it'll make a difference. It'll help you throughout your day-to-day struggles. I also encourage you to touch base with a friend that you haven't talked to in a while. This podcast has been great for me, and that old friends have reached out to me through emails, through text, or sometimes they just call and say hello. A good example is a good friend of mine from college, Jimmy Buckner. We were also fraternity brothers. He called me after the episode with Hal, and we spent about an hour just catching up with each other, going through what his family situation was, my family situation was. We have family members that we know and we're close to in each family. So it's fun just catching up with Jimmy again, and do that with other friends that you haven't talked to in a while. It's good for you. It's good for them. And it'll keep you in touch and it'll keep you grounded, and it'll get you out of the silo where you're just focusing on what's right in front of you. There's a big world out there, so look around. We need to get back and support our local sheriff. We need to support our local sheriff and law enforcement, but we also need to support our local businesses, our local restaurants, and the wait staff. You don't have to go crazy with the tip, but make sure you tip. If you can be a little bit generous, be a little bit generous. But we need to go back to eating in restaurants, helping to promote that food, promote the waiters and waitresses and the staff that's there, and help them. Also, educate yourself when you take time out to vote. We're in the election season right now, and it's easy just to look around or ask your friend, hey, who are you voting for this office or that office? I'm happy to tell people who I'm voting for and who I'm supporting, but that should also be your responsibility. So educate yourself a little bit with who that is out there that you might want to represent you. So often elections have just become mailers, TV ads. Well, try and go and listen to and try and talk to them. Be respectful because they are putting themselves out there. You have the ability to put yourself out there just like them. So remember, they're just citizens like we are, and that's how our government and that's how our society is going to survive and thrive, is by citizen legislature and citizen folks doing that. I also ask you to just help someone today. You probably know someone who's struggling. Only you know what help they need. You can ask them what help they need, but bend over and help them. If they need help picking something up, if it's your neighbor and they're elderly, see if they need help getting something off the top shelf. See if they need help with moving something healthy or something heavy. So, these are all things that we need to be just doing as a better society. Whew. Eli, that was a lot. Sorry I talked so much. I think that kind of just about wraps up our 1-year anniversary show. If you don't have anything else to add.
I do not, although I will say Taylor Swift was a highly requested guest from some people in this office.
Who?
Taylor Swift. You ever heard of her?
I've heard of her. I still cannot name a song that she sings. So maybe we can, does someone here have a connection with her?
Potentially.
Does Sarah have a connection
I guarantee
with her?
you somebody knows how to find her.
All right. Well, if we can get her on, I'll take your word that she will be a good guest and people will actually be interested in listening. I want to thank Jennifer. I want to thank Emily and Evangelina and Michael. And especially I want to thank all of our guests for making Todd's podcast so fun to do. We had about 327 million listeners around the globe, give or take 327 million. I'm not sure exactly how to count those, but I'm going with that number because no one can disprove it. But our guests have made the show what it is. We've had wonderful folks that have taken of their time, and they've come in and they've told us about their organization. They've told us about their topic or their cause or their situation, and they've been open and they've been honest, and I hope you've gotten a little bit better understanding of these people and who they are. If you want us to do another year, go to todddantzler.com. That's 3 D's in a row, todddantzler.com, or go to Todd's podcast. And if you would, please click the subscribe, the follow, the rate, and the like. I'd ask that you share us on your social media. Feel free to forward the marketing emails that we're sending out now announcing the episode. If you're not on that, you're welcome to, but if you'll subscribe or follow, you don't need to get the email from us. But please push it out if you like it. Tell as many people as possible. But we need some help getting the word out. And so tell your family and friends. If you've been on the podcast, send this out to your family and friends. And we're going to try and get to that 327 million if at all possible. If you think you might want to be a sponsor of an episode or of a series of episodes, let me know. I'm sure we're quite affordable. Eli, you don't make anything and I don't make anything, so you're not paying for salaries.
Nope.
And I think it could be an interesting way to get out in front of some folks. And that kind of wraps it up. Do you think we can get Evangelina to buy us lunch today at Longhorn? Because if so, we've got to prohibit her from those stinking Brussels sprouts.
Well, she's actually not in here today, but
surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
Well, next time she's here, we're going to drag her out, and when it's time for the for the check, we're going to dash and dine and leave it with Evangelina. So
Sounds good to me.
So the last shout out is to Hannah and Jacob and Caitlin and Jonathan and Porter and Savannah and Morgan and Colton and Blakely and Halen. I love you guys. I love my family. I appreciate everything that Eli does. I appreciate everything that our team and our staff does here at Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate and for Todd's podcast. I appreciate the opportunity to broadcast in such a great studio. We do everything in-house. I just am very blessed, and I just appreciate everything that I have. I appreciate the podcast, and I want to thank you all. I ask that you continue to listen and be nice to the person next to you. Thank you, and thank you, Eli. I appreciate everything.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. I hope you'll tune in next time where we talk to Colonel Charles Buck McLaughlin, who is the Range Operations Officer for the Avon Park Air Force Range. We talk a little bit about his early flying career in the A-10s and the A-117 Nighthawk stealth bomber. We also talk about the Avon Park Air Force Range. We talk about the missions that they run, and also we really talk about the environmental impact that they have and the programs that they're doing to be great stewards of the land. So hope you'll join us next time for our next episode with Colonel Charles Buck McLaughlin. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944 or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.